you've got your tail stripper, this is just a little plastic stripper. Got 2 different size holes in it. Just clamps onto the tailbone like that. You can gauge if you're far enough down the tail by the size of the hole in the stripper. If you can get onto it relatively easy where it will slide as opposed to pinch, you're down far enough to use it. If you're gripping around this meaty part up here and it's pinching this meat, you're not down far enough. I'm going to take this stripper, I'm going to get onto the tail, just onto the bone. Make sure you don't, see how this slides up and down? That means I'm down far enough to use it. If it's hanging on this part of the meat up here, you're going to put too much pressure on it. When it finally releases, you're going to tear that tail off of there. I'm going to make sure and get all the hair pushed down, away from the bone and away from the stripper. You're going to grab this, take this on top of your hand, and keep this pressed together. If this comes open, you're going to tear the skin off of it. Keep it pressed together. Take the top half and just slide that tail out. Just slide it straight through. But you got to make sure and keep that pressed shut. You can have your hand on top, but keep your thumb and forefinger holding pressure against that like that. And that's going to slide through. You're keeping that to the side where it's coming right through the saddle of your thumb there, and you're just pulling that through. If you ever get any slack in that, or if you let this come open and it pinches the hide in between this area here, if it starts pulling that hide up into this opening, into this side or this side, if it starts pulling the hide up into that, you'll tear the hide off. You'll tear your tail off and you'll have 2 different pieces of tail. Now that this tail is detached without a bone in it, it's just a tube is all it is. You have your initial line of where you skinned it. It's peeled in half for the section that you had peeled in half. What you're going to do is take and lay this out just as if it was still had the tail in it. You're going to pull it out long ways, and it's best to come around to the side of it where you can get a good visual line of sight. And you're going to run your knife through that tube of the tail where the bone used to be all the way to the end. If you get down to the point where it's really snug and you think that that little piece of the tail didn't make any difference, you've got the stuff out, you should be fine. What will happen is once this begins to dry, this little piece of the tail down here is going to rot, and then you're going to have a tail like this. It's going to look like a bobtail. When it rots, it will eventually just dry and fall off. Not only that, it continues to spread bacteria that's not killed down through the fur, and it will ride up it and cause the hair to slip up further on the animal. You absolutely don't want that. I've got this laid down flat with the backside exposed to where I can get a visual line of what I'm about to do. Open that up. Having this detached from these lower legs, I'm able to set this up just like, I mean, it's in bad shape, but just like as if it were laying here. Part the hair as best you can. There's going to be some hair come off, but this is a pretty furry part. Run that tail out straight. Take your knife. You're just running this tip inside here. You're going to run it down the length of the tail and pull straight up. Spread that apart. See what you've done. Run it through a little farther. Be careful not to turn the point. When you're running through like this, keep your knife parallel with the tail. Run it through straight as you can, because if you try to run through like this, this sharp tip is cutting through the backside of your tail. I mean, it will run smoothly if you've got a sharp knife. That's why it's important to continue to spread that apart, see what you're doing, making sure you're not running that tip down. You want to go straight through that tube, just like that, to where just this top side of the cutting surface is cutting and this blunt side is riding along the skin. You don't want to turn that down or you'll be cutting both sides at once. You can use the tip of your knife to separate the hair. And give you a little bit more of a visual. As it gets thin down here, you want to take and hold the tuft of the bottom. That way you can feel that knife blade running in as it gets really small. As you get in and it gets pressure on it, because this tube down here is going to be thinner than the width of your blade. So as you're holding the bottom, you run it in until it gets pressure, lift up. Pressure, lift up. And just keep working your way down that tail, because it's not going to slide in there all the way without cutting. But you want to be very careful or you'll cut the tip of that tail off before you realize what you've done. See, I'm right in the very end of it here, but I'm taking my fingers on the back and holding the tip of that tail until I feel the pressure, and I just run straight up. And that's it. Main thing on the tail is just to be sure and not run your knife like this. Because this sharp point right here, you're cutting on the top, but you're cutting the back side of that tail out too. So just be mindful not to do that. If in fact you do that, you can take and stitch that up on the back side. When you go to salt this tail, make sure you open it completely up, all the way down, and run salt all the way down through it. Then you can pull it back together. See how big thick this tail is? Well, there's a line. It's cut now. So you're going to have to spread that out to get that salt down in there. You can salt the far out of this thing right here, and it still not get in there to the skin. You have to actually manually, open it up, take your salt box or whatever your non-iodized salt. I use canning and pickling salt. You can use stock salt, rock salt, whatever you want to use, just as long as it's non-iodized, and run that salt down through the tail onto the bare skin and just fold it back over and put it back in this tube. Once you salt the rest of the hide, you can fold that in, cover everything up. What I normally do is salt everything down, wrap it up in a plastic bag or whatever, and put it in the refrigerator. You need to salt it for at least 24 hours. If you have a larger hide, some interesting spots on there, a larger hide, raccoon hides, things like that, deer hide, I like to leave them loose. Raccoons for sure, especially anything that's got a lot of fat to it, I don't wrap those up. I leave those relatively loose. I've got you can go to Orscheln's, Tractor Supply, places like that. Instead of paying all this high dollar money for fancy taxidermy salts and stuff like that, salt is salt, as long as it's non-iodized. They make a American Tradesman is one, and there's others that you can get what they call stock salt. It looks really dirty, but I mean, that's not really our concern at this point. But you take that salt, just put it in a tote of appropriate size to whatever you're trying to do, and put it in the bottom of that tote. It comes in a 25-pound bag. Get a couple of bags, and you can put a heck of a lot of 50 pounds worth of salt in there. But take it and just keep rolling that fur until it's fully covered. I'll push it back to the sides, lay it in there, and then cover it with salt. You can roll it and flip it every other day or every day if you want to. On stuff that's got a lot of fat, or if you had to leave a lot of meat on it, I'll let it salt for about 3 days. Let's go ahead. We've got this down about as far as it's going to go on this front foot, being how it's broken here. We've got this pad. I might try to work that down just a little farther. Good sharp knives are important. It keeps you from having to work too hard. And by working too hard, I mean too much pressure. Don't forget on that pad right there to take the cartilage out with it at this point. You will, like I said earlier, you will remove some of that later on in the process. Don't forget about that dew claw area of what you would call, I guess, the thumb. It is noticeably above the rest of the fingers on any canine. And I mean, if you haven't had some experience with it, you're probably not going to be thinking about having a finger, toe, whatever you want to call it, up that high. And what happens is you end up cutting through your fur on there. Easing that down the hand. You see this right here? I don't know if you can see that. This knob right here, that right there, that's the pad. That's the cartilage part that I was talking about. This is going to stay on for now until after you salt it and pickle it. And what you'll do once that dries out some is you'll just take your knife and work it off like that. You can see, as I'm just doing this for reference, that comes off and it leaves the hide underneath it of that pad. What happens is, if you salt it and pickle it without that on there, this thin membrane, just like the membrane of the nose, I like to leave some cartilage in there till after that, but this thin membrane, it'll get really, really dry, and it'll get really brittle. And what can happen in the process is you can end up actually breaking that skin because there wasn't anything left on there. And it was just the skin itself, and it couldn't handle the drying process and the pickling process of the acid. Now that we're down to this section here, we're into this hand area, as we've looked at before. Right there's that dew claw. This hand is down here. Foot, whatever you want to call it, is down here with the rest of the toes. Way up here on the top. Not much past where this wrist is. This thumb is actually way up here by the... You can see this joint right here. I flip that over. This joint, there it is. Wait, the rest of the toes are down here. I mean, 2.5, 3 inches past where this little dew claw sticks out. It's right up where the wrist bends. There's going to be that, I guess it would be like that, the little claw sticking out right up here by the wrist. So it's a lot farther up there than what you think. You're not going to be looking for it if you don't have much experience and you're thinking about fingers down here in the hand part of the foot, or that don't make any sense. Down here in this part of the foot, but this dew claw is actually way up here. What'll happen is if you go down too far, you're going to be down past the last knuckle that we have talked about. You're going to be down past that last knuckle, and when you end up cutting it off, the dew claw falls off. And that part is visible. And like I say, anytime you can leave stuff like that, it just looks that much more real. So right there is that last knuckle. You wouldn't think, you wouldn't be worried about that because you're not thinking about that at this time. So I'm going to cut right here, and you can see how it detaches. This part of the dew claw is the shortest finger, thumb, is off. And really, you take and cut that tendon back. I don't know if you can see that moving. This is the top knuckle, this knuckle here, and then there's one directly below it. You can see that bending, I think. But right there is that next knuckle. You're done with that. You're going to take your snips and cut that off. That part will stay. That's from this knuckle right here down to what would be your fingernail or their claw. That part is going to stay. Because if you cut down below that, the fingernail or claw will fall off. Alright. We've got most everything removed from the lower extremities of the body. Now we're going to start working up the head. Just keep removing that around the neck. I'll start taking the fur, grabbing it, and rolling it over. That puts pressure against the skin and against the opposing connective muscles, tissues. Still just working with the tip of your knife. Looks like he took a little bit of a hit there. Luckily, this did not get up on to the lower part, the best I can tell yet. Now you may skin farther and find out that that's not the case. But as long as these lips are not messed up, as long as the nose, eye area, ears aren't messed up, you get a lot of road rash. If you've got that in there, there's no really way to fix it. Out on the rest of the fur, if it's on the body, feet, things like that, as long as it's not on top of the hands or top of the feet, a lot of that can be fixed with stitch work. It is fairly forgiving. But things on the face, bottom jaw, that's where people are always looking from the bottom jaw up. Eyes, nose, bridge of the nose, things in that area. When you pick something off the highway, you think it's good to go. The ears are okay, the eyes are okay, and the nose is okay. But around the bottom jaw, a lot of times it'll be broken completely off. You need to raise that jaw up and look underneath and see if there's a lot of road rash and stuff like that through there. And you can have a really fine looking animal and that part be messed up. It's bad. I mean, I've tried it. I've tried it with different mounts. I've tried it with different techniques as far as patching it up, super glues, and whatever else, trying to mend that back together. That is not a good area to mend back together. I'm going to lay this out long ways now and start rolling See the weight of this fur, what I have left, the arm, legs, tail, body. I'm going to let that ride off the side of the table. I've got plastic laid over here and plastic on the floor. I am doing all this in my kitchen. It's about 18 degrees outside, and it looks like we've got about 10 inches or so of new snow. So the shop wasn't working out today. So I'm going to start rolling. We're getting to the ears here. You're going to get to the bottom nodule or node, whatever you want to call it, where the ear base connects to the skull. We're going to start to peel that over, and you'll see the back side. Let me peel that down a little further. See, as I'm just rolling that forward, and as I'm rolling across the top of this head, I just saw a white piece of cartilage poke through right there. This actually extends down into the muscle. There's two muscles on the side of the head right here. And once you peel that forward, this ear nodule, I don't know why I call it that, but the base of this ear, the cartilage actually goes down into that muscle. So it almost looks like a cheek on top of your head. But what you're going to want to do, where these two muscles are on top of the skull, you're going to start to feel that ear cartilage, and you're going to want to work it out of those two muscles. It actually goes down inside of those two muscles. I don't know. I don't feel that on top of my head. I'm not saying it's not there. But see, as I roll this forward, those two muscles there on top of the head, I'm starting to feel, and I guess this is what I should be calling the ear canal, that's going down into those two muscles. A fox's head is relatively small, and you won't be much past those ears, and you're sitting there concentrating. Right there was that ear canal, just in the very funnel of that ear, right where it connects, up about a quarter, 3/8 of an inch is where you're going to cut that cartilage, and it stays attached. But you can see this little tube of cartilage coming out on the top. It's not actually connected to the skin, and it's no longer connected to the meat. It just sticks up as the cartilage just sticks up above like a little funnel coming off the top. And you can take your finger and roll that back and start to give yourself some safety from getting into the rest of it. Like I say, be cautious. You're about to start getting into the eye area, past the base, the funnel of the ear canal. You're about to be right directly across from the eye. And another thing is when you have the ear and the eye, both you're to the point of, skinning around them. Don't be mindful that you have the jaw right here, and a fox, canine, their jaws, their lip line actually goes further back than what it'd be on a person. So you got your ear canal, your eye, and then directly below it, a fox's mouth actually comes back further, almost directly below, but lower than their ear canal. If you're not overly experienced, some of this stuff, you're thinking about what you've got going on with you, as far as the anatomy of that animal. But things are positioned differently. Like I said, that dew claw, the thumb, so to speak, of that animal, of the canine, will be a lot further up than what you had thought it would be. The lip line goes back considerably farther than what you would think that it does, because their jaws are built different than your mouth. Removing the other side of the ear there. You can see that part I'm talking about, that funnel, so to speak, of cartilage, the ear canal that actually connects into the base of the skull. It is separate, not separate, but it's an extension of the ear cartilage itself. You can actually work it, but you have to connect or disconnect it down here at the base. Now, some of that, once we flesh it, salt it, pickle it, and everything, you will cut that off, and that part will be removed, and an ear liner will go in. You will keep this part of the cartilage that is connected to the ear. You will remove the skin from the cartilage on one side, not both. The entire piece of cartilage does not come out. It is disconnected from the inner skin of the ear. That way you can, get your pickling agent, your acid. I use McKenzie Ultimate Acid up in there, and it'll keep that from rotting. But right when you get past that ear, just within close proximity, you're about to get to the eye. I'm going to swap knives here. We're starting to get into some more delicate work. And that being said, it's time for a bathroom break. I'll be right back. Alright, on to the tail. I'm going to find that bone right there, like I was saying, and for right now, since it's detached from the animal, we're going to slide straight down the tailbone. Just parting that skin and hair with your fingers. It's going to be a little more delicate doing it this way, being detached, because we can't roll it down. When it's attached to the animal, you can actually pull down on the fur and roll that down. What we will do when we get to a certain point is take the tail stripper and zip the rest of it out of there without actually skinning that part off. But you can't do that immediately. There's too much connective tissue at that point. I'm just working around the base of that tail. You can see how I'm just working that loose. Still just using the very tip of my knife. Get over here. It's going to get literally pretty hairy at this point. You just got to kind of keep peeling that back to where it stays visible. This is pretty thin skin back here, so you will have to be fairly careful. You can roll it some and peel it down. What you want to make sure that you do is keep that vertical like that, because if you start spiraling around the tail when you go to stitch it, it'll pull it back together, but it'll have your tail twisted and the fur won't line up like it's supposed to. So keep that line, keep this bottom side of the tail to the table here, and you make sure that you keep a visibly straight line right down the center of this tailbone. There is a couple of long tendons. You can see this tendon here and a tendon here on each side of the tail. Now there's a meaty part right through the middle, where you got your tendon, and then the meat part in the middle. You can actually stick your knife in that meaty part and help guide you down that tail. Fur laid out flat. And like I say, be mindful of keeping that right underneath the fur, right underneath your tailbone. That way you can keep a straight line. Because if it starts spinning on you once it's loose, that's going to start spiraling your cut. Like I say, it gets pretty delicate at this point. You're just going to want to take your hands and spread the fur, keeping it pushed to the side, working your way around that tail. Once you get it it's furry. Once you get it loose from the tail bone to a degree, you can kind of just peel it back. Now, like I say, it's pretty thin down through there, so you can't be overly aggressive with it. When you get down to about right here, when you've got 4 or 5 inches, this is where we're going to take the tail zipper, stick it on top, and pull this out. Do not, for any reason, try to grab this part of the skin and pull that tail out of there. You'll tear the tail plumb in half, and then you'll have a piece of this and a piece of this. Do not do that. Give me 1 second, and I need to get my zipper. Completely removing it, but thinning it down. You can see how I'm working this hand, removing that pad, starting to expose some of the fingers on this top side. Let me go ahead. Cut that off where you can see what I'm doing here. Cut the tendons in that joint. Now that we've got that out of the way, you can see I've removed this area of the skin in the hand. And I'm just about down. This is where you got to start being careful. I'm about down to these knuckles right here. It'd be like your most pronounced knuckles on the top of your hand, where from your wrist to your fingers, you got this area, and then you've got these large knuckles here. That's about where I'm at on here, is to this portion here, is this part of your hand, and then I'm down to these big knuckles. When you get down to these big knuckles, you're going to want to pop them through. See, I'm pulling and pushing at the same time, but you're not going to go all the way. The reason that you're not trying to go down any further is you will start to cut through the skin on the insides of the fingers. Once you're past these knuckles right here, we're just going to go ahead and cut those knuckles, because you have to start working each finger individually. If you just keep pulling this down and keep cutting the front and cutting the front and cutting the front, you're not cutting anything inside. And what will happen is you get down far enough, you end up cutting this part of the finger skin off. And depending on your mount or whatever, that could be very visible, and it makes it really hard to get the rest of these bones out. See how I'm just cutting that knuckle? That's that top knuckle right there. And basically the hand is free. I'm not going to do it right now. We'll come back to it in a minute. But you can see how the individual bones, 1, 2, 3, 4, and the dew claw's up in there somewhere. But now we have each individual finger to work with. We'll come back to it in a minute. But what we're going to do is take your pliers and actually work one toe at a time. You get done with that one, you go to the next one, you go to the next one. And you have to work those all the way down until where your finger is on this joint right here. You can keep the last knuckle to what, it'll be the claw, but what would be your fingernail. From there down, that's the only part that you can keep inside that foot. When you get ready to do your mount or whatever, you'll roll clay into little sticks and stick it in these tubes of skin, which is from here down. You'll stick it in there and you'll actually make new fingers. But this small piece of bone right here, from your last knuckle to what will be their claw, is the only thing you can keep. And the reason is, if you don't keep that section of bone right there, there's a small tendon in there. And if you take that bone out and cut that tendon, the claw will fall off. It may not fall off that day, but once you do your mount, as it starts to dry and everything starts to pull, that claw will just fall off. And the more realistic your animal can look, the eyes, the claws, the everything else. I mean, I'm not saying it can't look good without claws, but it's just not as it was in the wild. It doesn't, everything that you can do like that makes it look more real. All right, we're disconnected from both legs and from the back here. We got to get this tail out. So I'm going to flip it back over. Trying to figure out where we are. There's the back. I think what I'm going to do, you can see there's nothing really left holding on. The tailbone is broken off from the spine. We're just going to cut that off. There's nothing but skin basically holding it on, and we have just the tail. Just the tail left. Now the anus is still connected there. You're not going to keep that. You're not trying to you're not trying to keep that. Let's see. Okay, this is as if it was flipped back over from the underside. There is the anus, what's left of it. And you can see this extra meat hanging on here. That's actually coming through the skin. Might be able to put, there it is right there. This is a portion of the thigh that you can either cut this off, which I'm going to do. See how you can just let that slide off of there, being very careful, just using that front edge of the knife. It's easier to do it right now than it is later on. You could flesh that off there, but this is already damaged enough with holes and thin spots and whatever that you're not going to be able to run your fleshing knife like you normally would. I mean, getting down there and putting some pressure on it to get that meat off. Normally, once you get the meat rolling, it'll go ahead and go. But you're not going to be able to put that kind of pressure on it. I mean, you see this big old hole right here already. Some of this stuff we're going to cut off, later on in the process, we're going to cut that off and just call it a loss on that. It will go ahead and stitch up just fine. You're going to be able to tell the difference if that hole's there or if this is just cut off across here cleanly. But you do need to get as much of that meat off as you can right now. That way you're not having to push it off. And when you do, end up tearing this bigger. You're not going to want to do that. We certainly don't want to have this tail detached. Here at the anus, there it is, right there. You want to take and insert your knife on the tailbone here and go around each side. That's going to be completely removed. I can feel this. I'm taking my finger, I can feel the bone underneath, and I'm actually taking the knife just as if I would be trying to press it through that bone to my finger. Don't do that, of course. But then you'll take and you'll hold the anus. See, and I'm just sliding around. That right there. These are the testicles. You're not trying to keep that. And no, you won't notice the difference. You won't have to take up that space in the fur. There's not going to be a big hole there. You're going to stitch that shut. It'll stretch that far. Now we're going to go around the other side. This is a little, once you get the first side cut, this is a little trickier. You might want to slide down the tailbone just a little bit and work backwards for just that small section there. That way you got something to hold on to. Working around the anus again on this opposite side. And see, the anus is actually still attached to the animal. It's just not to the fur. These are the testicles. Get rid of that. Alright, now for this tail. If this, let's just go ahead and get rid of that too. If this tail was still attached to this animal, it'd be a lot easier to work it. You want to make sure, this is his back, you want to make sure and find the underside of the tail. With it being loose like this, I mean, it's kind of hard to tell. But you want to find its back area, flip it straight over. This is where your stitch work is going to be down this tail. You're going to want to part the hair. It don't have to be perfect, and you're not going to be able to get down through it. It's pretty thick in this area right here. You're going to cut some hair in the